In May 1945, Allied soldiers discovered something terrifying in the ruins of Berlin. Not just battlefield reports, but thousands of pages of detailed operational blueprints showing exactly what Hitler planned to do after winning the war. Remove 31 million people, unify Europe under a single currency controlled from Berlin, build a new world capital that would dwarf anything on Earth, and then wage a final war against the United States. These weren't the ravings of a madman, they were systematic plans created by economists, engineers, and academics with precise timelines, population targets, and implementation schedules. By 1942, Nazi Germany controlled most of Europe, and these horrifying blueprints were terrifyingly close to becoming reality. This is the story of the secret files that revealed how close humanity came to living in Hitler's New World Order. In May 1945, as Allied troops entered the ruins of Berlin, they made a discovery that would chill the world. Hidden in underground bunkers, fireproof safes, and secret archives across Germany, soldiers found thousands of pages of documentation. These weren't simple military orders or propaganda materials. They were comprehensive operational blueprints for reshaping the entire planet under Nazi control. The discovery happened in stages. On May 2nd, Soviet forces uncovered extensive records in Hitler's bunker complex. American units found additional caches in the Reich Chancellery basement. British intelligence teams located more documentation in abandoned SS headquarters. Some files had been stored in fireproof safes as if preserved for future generations. Others were stuffed hastily into wooden crates, apparently prepared for evacuation that never occurred. A few were found half-burned in fireplaces, last-minute attempts to destroy evidence that failed. The sheer volume was staggering. Thousands of pages stamped Reich secret matter, or for leaders only, revealing detailed schemes for what the Führer intended after victory. The captured archives revealed that Nazi planners had organized their blueprint for world domination into 3 specific categories, each with detailed documentation, timelines, and assigned leaders. The first category was military conquest, a 3-stage strategy to take over the world. Stage 1 would achieve complete German control of Europe from the Atlantic Ocean to the Ural Mountains in Russia. Stage 2 would extend Axis power across all of Africa, creating a vast colonial empire called Middle Africa. Stage 3 envisioned a final battle to defeat and subjugate the United States of America. The second category was economic reorganization. Walther Funk, Hitler's economics minister and Reichsbank president, had written detailed proposals for creating a unified European economic system under German control, eliminating trade barriers, establishing fixed exchange rates tied to the German Reichsmark, and ultimately creating a single European currency. The third category was racial engineering, centered on a document called Generalplan Ost that provided a blueprint for the systematic elimination or deportation of over 31 million people across Eastern Europe. At the heart of Nazi planning stood Generalplan Ost, drafted by SS designers in 1941 and 1942. This was not a general statement of ideology, but a detailed operational blueprint with specific population targets for each ethnic group. The lead planner was Professor Konrad Meyer-Hetling, who held doctorates in both agriculture and economics. Working under him, a team of academics, university professors, statisticians, agricultural experts, and urban planners applied their expertise to the systematic organization of mass elimination on an industrial scale. These professionals calculated population figures with precision, determined exactly how much food could be produced in different regions, and designed infrastructure for German colonists. The scale becomes clear in the numbers. Approximately 80 to 85% of Polish people would be eliminated, while the majority of Belarusians and Ukrainians faced deportation or extermination. These weren't estimates. The planners had calculated exact percentages for each conquered population. To replace these removed millions, the plan called for settling 10 million German colonists in Eastern Europe over 25-30 years. In mid-1940, immediately after the fall of France, Walther Funk wrote his secret memorandum titled Economic Reorganization of Europe. This document, later discovered among captured Nazi archives, proposed a unified European economic zone under German control with a long-term goal of a single currency. Funk approached these plans with systematic precision. He held a doctorate in economics from the University of Berlin and had years of experience in international finance. His framework would eliminate trade barriers between European nations, establish fixed exchange rates tied to the German Reichsmark, and eventually replace all national currencies with a single European currency that Berlin would control. The scope was breathtaking. Every nation's resources would be channeled toward German industry. Raw materials would flow to German factories. Agricultural products would feed German citizens. Industrial output would serve German military needs. The conquered nations would become economic satellites, producing what Germany demanded at prices Germany dictated, creating a self-sustaining empire that could operate independently of global trade systems. Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect, created detailed blueprints for transforming Berlin into Welthauptstadt Germania, world capital Germania. Working from 1937 through 1943, Speer produced professional architectural drawings with precise measurements that revealed the regime's global ambitions in physical form. At the center stood the Volkshalle, or People's Hall, a massive domed building that would rise more than 200 meters into the sky, with an interior capable of holding 150,000 people. To understand the scale, St. Peter's Basilica in Rome could have fit entirely within this structure. Speer's designs extended beyond the dome itself. He planned a triumphal arch standing 120 meters high, double the height of Paris's Arc de Triomphe. A grand boulevard would stretch for miles through central Berlin, lined with government buildings designed to project Nazi power across the world. These weren't merely plans on paper. Construction had already begun. A massive concrete cylinder called the Schwerbelastungskörper still stands in modern Berlin today, built in 1941 to test whether the ground could support the weight of the intended structures. The blueprint originated in a book written by a failed artist in a prison cell. In 1925, Adolf Hitler sat in Landsberg prison following a failed coup attempt and wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Published openly in 1925 and 1927, this book laid out Hitler's fundamental ideology for anyone to read. In it, Hitler introduced the concept of Lebensraum, living space. He argued that Germany needed to expand eastward to gain agricultural land and natural resources, writing that the nation must turn our gaze toward the land in the east. He was referring to Russia and Eastern Europe, describing the Slavic peoples living there as racially inferior and claiming their lands were rightfully Germany's to take. The book sold hundreds of thousands of copies before Hitler came to power, then millions more after he became chancellor in 1933. By war's end in 1945, approximately 12.5 million copies had been distributed in Germany alone. Foreign editions circulated widely in English and French by 1933. The blueprint was published openly for the world to read, yet foreign governments dismissed it entirely as extremist rhetoric that Hitler surely didn't mean. Despite Mein Kampf being widely available and translated into multiple languages, foreign governments made a catastrophic error. They dismissed it as rhetoric rather than genuine policy. Intelligence services analyzed the book and produced detailed reports. Diplomats discussed it in cables to their capitals, and political leaders debated its meaning, only to conclude it wasn't serious. Some claimed it was youthful extremism Hitler had outgrown. Others dismissed it as propaganda designed to appeal to radical followers, but not actual policy. Still, others found the ideas too extreme to take seriously, assuming no modern European leader would attempt such actions in the 20th century. This failure of imagination would cost tens of millions of lives. Democratic leaders couldn't imagine that someone would openly publish plans for conquest and then actually carry them out. They assumed people said extreme things to win elections, but governed more moderately once in power. What makes this dismissal even more disturbing is what happened 20 years later. On April 29, 1945, as Soviet troops closed in on his bunker, Hitler dictated his final testament, repeating every single theme from Mein Kampf with remarkable consistency. Hitler's opportunity came with catastrophe. In 1929, the American stock market crashed and economic disasters spread to Germany. By 1932, unemployment had soared to 6 million, nearly a third of the workforce. Banks failed, businesses closed in waves, and life savings disappeared overnight. People were desperate, wanting someone to blame and someone to fix the crisis. Hitler offered both, blaming Germany's problems on the Treaty of Versailles, Jewish people, communists, and foreign powers while promising to make Germany strong again. His message resonated powerfully. In the 1930 elections, the Nazi Party won 107 seats in parliament. In 1932, they won 230 seats, becoming the largest party. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler became chancellor through the democratic process. Within weeks, he began dismantling democracy itself. After the Reichstag fire in February 1933, Hitler convinced the president to declare a state of emergency that never ended. In March 1933, the Enabling Act gave him power to make laws without parliament's approval. Germany was no longer a democracy. It was a dictatorship, and Hitler now had power to implement his vision. Hitler moved carefully at first, knowing Germany was militarily weak. For 2 years, the regime rebuilt the military in secret. Then on March 16, 1935, Hitler made a stunning announcement. Germany was rearming, creating an air force and expanding the army to over 500,000 men, directly violating the Treaty of Versailles. Britain and France could have responded with military force. The German army was still weak in 1935, making intervention straightforward. Instead, they took no real action beyond diplomatic protests. Hitler learned a crucial lesson. The democracies wouldn't fight to enforce their own treaties. Over the next 3 years, Hitler tested the Allies repeatedly. In March 1936, German troops entered the demilitarized Rhineland. No response. In March 1938, Germany annexed Austria. No response. In September 1938, the Munich Agreement allowed Germany to take the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned to London proclaiming, "Peace for our time," unaware that Hitler's ambitions had only begun. The pattern was clear. Diplomatic pressure delivered results without firing a shot. Behind closed doors, Hitler was revealing something far darker to his military commanders. On November 5, 1937, a full year before the Munich Agreement, Hitler called together his top military commanders in the Reich Chancellery. His adjutant, Colonel Friedrich Hossbach, took notes that survived the war and became known as the Hossbach Memorandum. At this meeting, Hitler laid out his plans for war, saying Germany must gain living space by 1943 to 1945 at the latest, and telling his generals that Germany would need to conquer Czechoslovakia and Austria as first steps. The Hossbach Memorandum proved these weren't reactions to events, but predetermined strategy. In March 1939, when German troops occupied the rest of Czechoslovakia, the illusion finally shattered. This wasn't about uniting ethnic Germans. This was conquest. On March 31, 1939, Britain and France issued a guarantee to Poland, promising war if Germany attacked. The line had finally been drawn. Hitler began preparing immediately but faced a critical problem. He couldn't fight Britain and France while also invading Poland. His solution shocked the world. On August 23, 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union signed what appeared to be a peace treaty, though the pact secretly divided Eastern Europe between the two powers. For Hitler, the pact was purely tactical. In Mein Kampf, he had written extensively about conquering Soviet territory. His hatred for the Soviet Union was fundamental to his ideology. But in August 1939, Hitler needed to remove the threat of a two-front war. The pact accomplished that goal. 9 days later, on September 1, 1939, at 4:45 a.m., German forces invaded Poland with 1.5 million troops. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany, marking the start of World War II. Poland fell within weeks, but the German occupation revealed something ominous. This wasn't just military conquest. SS units called Einsatzgruppen followed the army with orders to eliminate Polish leaders, intellectuals, priests, and teachers. In the first months, Germans eliminated hundreds of thousands of Polish civilians, closed universities, banned Polish newspapers, and began forcing Jewish people into sealed ghettos. Poland became a laboratory for policies they would later implement across Eastern Europe. In April 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. Then in May, German forces swept through the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg before striking France. France, expected to hold for months, collapsed in just 6 weeks. The fall of France in June 1940 shocked the world. Suddenly, Nazi Germany controlled most of Western Europe. With this victory, the regime's planners began thinking seriously about what would come after total victory. This is when the detailed documentation discovered in Berlin bunkers in 1945 began to take formal shape. In June 1941, Hitler made the most consequential decision of the war, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Beginning on June 22, 1941, more than 3 million German and Axis troops attacked across a front stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, the largest military operation in human history. Operation Barbarossa represented the realization of Lebensraum, the vision Hitler had written about in Mein Kampf 16 years earlier. As German armies drove deep into Soviet territory in summer and fall 1941, SS planners began drafting the detailed blueprint for ethnic cleansing and German colonization that became Generalplan Ost. By late 1942, these weren't merely theoretical documents. The Nazis had begun implementing Generalplan Ost through pilot programs designed to test whether the broader plan would work. Between 1942 and 1943, the SS carried out a pilot program in the Zamość region of Poland, forcibly removing more than 100,000 Polish people from their villages, then bringing in German farmers from other parts of Europe to settle the emptied land. Another pilot program called Hegewald was established in Ukraine, where SS families were settled on land cleared of Ukrainian inhabitants. Throughout occupied Poland, the regime had already expelled more than 1.5 million Poles and Jews from Western areas by 1940. The Nazis also kidnapped more than 200,000 Polish children during the war, children with blonde hair and blue eyes, physical features the regime associated with Aryan racial characteristics. These children were taken from their families, given German names, and placed with German families for forced assimilation. The infrastructure for mass deportation and colonization already existed and was operational. The plans discovered in Berlin bunkers weren't future fantasies. They were current operations, waiting for military victory to expand. Among the captured documents was one of the most disturbing plans, the Hunger Plan, developed in spring 1941 before Operation Barbarossa began. This strategy, created by high-ranking Nazi officials, including Herbert Backe, the State Secretary for Food and Agriculture, calculated that conquering the Soviet Union would create a food crisis. The German Wehrmacht needed enormous food supplies, and Germany itself faced potential shortages. The solution was chilling. Deliberately starve approximately 30 million Soviet citizens to death. The plan divided Soviet territory into zones. Surplus zones that produced more food than they consumed would be seized to feed German troops and civilians. Deficit zones, primarily cities, would be cut off from food supplies. The inhabitants would be left to starve. This wasn't a war crime that emerged from chaos. It was calculated policy created before the invasion even began. Documents show Nazi planners knew exactly what would happen. They wrote that tens of millions of people will become superfluous and will die or must emigrate to Siberia. The language was bureaucratic, but the intent was genocide through starvation on an unimaginable scale. Hitler understood that conquering Eastern Europe required infrastructure to maintain control. Among the captured plans was the Breitsbourbahn, the super railway. This wasn't a normal railroad, but a massive system with tracks 3 meters wide compared to standard European tracks of 1.435 meters. The extra width would allow enormous trains carrying unprecedented cargo loads at high speeds. The super railway would connect Germany to the conquered eastern territories, running from Berlin through Warsaw, then branching toward Kiev, Moscow, and eventually the Caucasus oil fields. Hitler had personally approved the plans, and engineering work had begun. The system was designed to transport German colonists to their new settlements, bring agricultural products and raw materials back to Germany, and move military forces quickly across the vast conquered territories. The Breitsbourbahn represented Hitler's confidence that the eastern territories would be permanently German. You don't invest in expensive infrastructure for temporary occupation. By 1942, German engineers had completed detailed technical specifications, calculated construction costs, and begun manufacturing prototype locomotives. The super railway was ready to build, waiting only for military victory. After the fall of France, Hitler turned his attention to Britain. Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, involved detailed landing plans assigning specific units to specific beaches. German planners studied British coastal defenses, calculated how many troops would be needed, and prepared the invasion fleet. But the plan had one critical requirement. Germany needed air superiority over the English Channel. During the summer and fall of 1940, The Luftwaffe attempted to destroy the Royal Air Force in what became known as the Battle of Britain. British pilots flying Spitfires and Hurricanes fought desperately to defend their homeland. The RAF inflicted such heavy losses on German bombers that Hitler was forced to postpone the invasion indefinitely. Without control of the skies, an amphibious invasion would be suicidal. But the planning didn't stop. Operation Sea Lion remained on the books throughout the war. Documents captured in 1945 showed that German planners continued refining the invasion plans, even after 1940, treating Britain's eventual conquest as merely delayed rather than abandoned. Hitler's determination to control Britain never wavered. He just shifted his focus eastward first. Hitler's ambitions extended beyond Europe and Africa to the ultimate target, the United States. In his unpublished 1928 book, discovered after the war, Hitler had written about the ultimate struggle against the American democratic world. This wasn't an afterthought, but part of his original plan. In 1938, Hitler ordered development of the America bomber, a very long-range bomber capable of striking American cities from European bases. Multiple aircraft companies competed to design a bomber with enough range to reach New York City from Europe, drop bombs, and return. By 1942, several prototype designs existed, including the Messerschmitt Me-264 and the Junkers Ju-390. The captured files also revealed plans to seize Atlantic islands, particularly the Azores, as forward bases for attack on America. German military planners studied American industrial capacity, identified strategic bombing targets, and calculated how many bombers would be needed. The war against America wasn't a possibility Hitler was preparing for. It was an inevitability he was planning for. The only question was timing. First Europe, then Africa, then America. Stage 2 of Hitler's three-stage world conquest plan focused on Africa. Nazi planners envisioned creating Middle Africa, a vast German colonial empire stretching across the continent. Documents captured in 1945 showed that German planners had studied Italian colonial methods in Libya, learning how to control large territories with relatively small military forces through strategic brutality. The vision included incorporating existing French, Belgian, and British colonies into a German-controlled system. German officials visited Italian Libya before the war to observe colonial administration firsthand. They took notes on how Italy controlled the local population, extracted resources, and maintained order. These observations informed their own colonial plans. But Hitler's vision extended beyond just German control. In 1941, Germany and Japan formalized understandings on dividing the world into spheres of influence. German Foreign Minister Ribbentrop and Japanese Ambassador Oshima confirmed that each power would control its respective half of Eurasia. The two Axis powers were literally drawing lines on a map, dividing the planet between them. The boundary would be the Yenisei River in Siberia. By January 1942, Nazi Germany appeared unstoppable. German forces controlled territory from the Atlantic coast of France to the outskirts of Moscow. They occupied Norway in the north and Greece in the south. Axis ally Japan controlled much of Asia and the Pacific. In this moment of apparent triumph, the regime's planners finalized the blueprints discovered by Allied soldiers in 1945. The documentation existed, stamped Reich secret matter. The pilot programs were underway. The economic exploitation of occupied territories was functioning. The infrastructure was ready. All that was missing was final military victory. But military victory never came. The turning points arrived in rapid succession. Germany failed to capture Moscow in winter 1941 to 1942. The Battle of Stalingrad in 1942 to 1943 destroyed an entire German army. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 shattered Japanese naval power in the Pacific. The Battle of El Alamein in late 1942 stopped German advances in North Africa. Operation Overlord in June 1944 opened a second front in Western Europe. Each of these battles was desperately close. Different decisions at critical moments could have changed outcomes. The secret files discovered in Berlin in 1945 matter because they reveal how close humanity came to catastrophe. If Moscow had fallen, if Britain had been invaded successfully, if the Soviet Union had collapsed, the plans in those files would have been implemented across the entire European continent. The machinery was in motion, the personnel were trained, the procedures were tested, and only military defeat stopped them. Understanding this history provides crucial lessons for today. The blueprints were published openly in Mein Kampf, yet the world chose appeasement over confrontation. Warning signs were dismissed as rhetoric until it was too late. By the time democracies finally acted, 85 million people would die in the war required to stop implementation. The documents remind us that authoritarian ambitions don't stay contained, that published threats should be taken literally, and that early intervention is far less costly than late confrontation. The secret files show that evil doesn't announce itself as evil. It comes with detailed plans, economic justifications, and the veneer of legitimacy. Recognizing these patterns before they mature into catastrophe remains history's most important lesson.